Well, have you ever had something really weird happen to you? Something that's so weird you need a witness? And I have friends who claim that would describe my life, right? But the two that stick in my mind is in 1975, I'd been hitchhiking around. I ended up in Vancouver, Washington. I'd been thrown off this ranch in Half Moon Bay where I lived for a while in a horse stall. And now the owner who threw me off was going to be out of town for a month. So another guy who lived at the ranch, Ned Gumbo, as I call him in the book, he drove up to pick me up and give me a ride back to Half Moon Bay. So he gets up there, and I went out looking for mushrooms, China hats, little psilocybin mushrooms in cow pastures. It's what I did every fall. And this was like the first part of November, the very prime time. And Guy Gumbo and I had an unusual relationship. We both tried to kill each other, and we were always the two craziest guys in the room. So, you know, it's easy to understand that we weren't friends. There was always kind of that tension. We're friends now. We're best of friends, but it took a long time. So he wanted to go look for mushrooms with me, and I didn't want him to, except he was lucky. Luckiest fucker that ever lived. People think I'm lucky I'm alive. That guy, he's had more than a cat's lives. So we're out there. It's a rainy day. We're out in the cow pasture. He's about 15 feet away from me, sort of like you are. And we're scouring the ground. And you're keeping an eye up because, there are cows around. And the guy who owns the pasture, there's only one reason a couple lowlife hippies are out in his cow pasture. And so we're going along and we're kind of arguing. And it looked prime, and I hadn't found a single mushroom anywhere, and he hadn't. And uh, I turned to say something to him, and a giant crow lands on my shoulder. So it's literally, it only had to turn slightly to poke my eye out, and it's right there on my shoulder. And fortunately, I suppose, I froze. I couldn't really believe. Actually, I wasn't loaded that morning. That's why I was out looking for stuff. If I'd been loaded, it would have freaked me out. And Gumbo's over there, and he goes, "Don't move! Don't move! It's a sign from the gods. It means that the mushrooms are near." This is from a guy who is as spiritual as a can opener, right? And I look, no shit, I look over at this crow, and it looks down, and then it takes off, and then I look down, and it was the biggest fairy circle, as they call them, of mushrooms I've ever seen. Thousands of psilocybic mushrooms. And I dropped to my knees and shoved a handful in because that's when they're the best, when they're fresh, that purple juice in the stems. And do I think that crow was some harbinger of something? No, it seems to me that I would have stepped right into those shrooms otherwise. But it just always blew me out that crow landed on my shoulder. And the next time it was like 2000, and my buddy uh, Dom DeBerry and I were in John Day, Oregon, at some outdoor expo. We had a cabin out in the woods and Sisters for years, and we were looking at some sort of thing for it. And we stayed overnight. And the next night, we're driving out of town, and just to kill time, we saw this Kam Wah Chung, I think was the pronunciation, museum. And it turns out, according to the brochure there, that it was John Day. A lot of Chinese immigrants came there in the 1860s for a gold rush, and there was timber around there and different things. So these guys in 1887, they started this Kwa Wah Chung store and kind of clinic for Chinese medicine, and a social center, it was the local opium den. So it was an opium den for almost 50 years. And when you walked in there, it was circular. The walls were all black, and there were cots up against the wall and things. And I wasn't on anything, oddly enough. And I hadn't had a drink in 25 years. But there's like 8 other people, and they give you a tour, and we're in the alcove when you step right in, and I got the weird alky aura thing, the sort of bell of dread that rings just before something like the DTs. And I thought, what the fuck? I don't drink anymore. Was this my first official flashback to something? You always claim flashbacks, but actually getting weird that quickly. So I followed the group into the next room, and I purposely went to the back, and they had these glass cabinets with old, opium pipes or whatever in there. And I pretended to be looking around, but I was getting dizzier and dizzier. And then I heard this flood of like hundreds of voices, uh, Chinese voices, white voices, all these things in a jumble. And the next thing I knew, bam, I passed out. And apparently I fell straight. It was a old wood floor with planks in it. And I fell straight back, and I was out. Who knows how long I was out. And when I came to, DeBerry's slapping my face. And being a Bay Area guy, it's not like he has any empathy or anything. He says, what are you on now? What are you on now, you piece of shit? And I said, get me out of here. Get me out of here. And I put my hand over his shoulder. He took me outside. We'd driven his pickup, and he didn't even put me in the back. He propped me up because he'd known me forever. And he's always been my best friend. And he propped me up on the passenger side, and he said, "You'll be all right, right? I want to go back on the tour." So he left, and uh, took about 60 seconds, and I started feeling normal again. And I walked around a little, and I thought, what the fuck was that about? It was the closest everyday past life kind of thing I'd ever experienced. Like, it was a place I'd been before, and also late in life, I'm allergic to the poppy plant. So anything from it makes me ill. Like one Vicodin, I'd throw up. I just can't have anything connected with it. So was it those old opium laden walls that smoked? I found that impossible to believe. But being me, I had to find out. So I went back in, and I could hear the tour had gone around the house, and it was coming towards me. And I walk in, I took about 3 steps, and I heard all that howling again. And I got really weak on my feet, and I stumbled over. There was an easy chair there, and I fell back in that. And, the noises just increased. And, it's like that other story I told. I'm doing an EBO, all this crazy shit and everything. I always remember the tour guide comes around, and uh, barely a second look, she turns to Tom. She goes, "Your buddy's back." And when we drove away, he wanted to stop and go ask that tour guide if anything like that had ever happened before. And I told him, no, I just want to get the fuck out of here. I don't ever want to be within 100 miles of that place again. But I will always wonder now, what went on in the house of Ka Win Chung.